Hi guys, and hi to everyone watching the recording. Uh, Today's book club, or I guess the paper we're going to be reading, is a paper by Peter Singer, which is a contemporary philosopher, and he concerns himself a lot with ethics and morality. And this is one of his most famous papers, addressing famine and moral. Well, the example is famine and starvation, but it really these arguments they kind of apply to any type of charitable work or any type of helping for other people. But the way he starts off this paper basically is by making a couple of claims, and these claims he says like very explicitly, you can either accept them and then come along for the ride and the argument, or you can just reject them flat-footedly and then no need to read anything else. And those basic those basic key points are basically that there exists preventable suffering in the world. This was written in the 70s, and he's using the example of the a Bengal famine that was going on, like a big famine and refugee crisis. But same thing applies for any of the other countless like crises going on in the world. But his main point is that in the world there exists suffering, and a lot of this suffering is clearly preventable or easily preventable. Not things like natural disasters that aren't really preventable. This is more so like wealth inequality or poverty or famines and so on. And he says that rich nations have the capacity, the resources, and the ability to alleviate at least some, if not all, of this type of suffering. His other big point is that suffering is bad. So in philosophy, you might come across like there's some radical views that people have in ethics that kind of go along the lines of saying that suffering is not necessarily bad. And he just says if you don't agree with suffering being bad, with pain being bad, no need to read. I have nothing for you. But those are his two kind of main claims that there is great suffering in the world, suffering is bad. And he's saying that on the individual level, so just person to person or the private level, people are not doing nearly enough. No one's going to protests very often, or at least you might go to protests, but it's few and far in between. People don't really write to parliament. People don't really, try and contact their governments. No one's doing like symbolic fasts really, or any of this type of like activist stuff. So on the individual level, Singer's making the claim that people aren't really doing very much. On the government level, which is another layer to kind of his points, is that the governments are not prioritizing ending all of these crises or all of this suffering. He thinks it's very silly and outright immoral, the way the government spends certain things. He uses the example of the Concorde, which was like a supersonic type of plane that they were developing in the UK around this time. And they were saying that, these Concorde projects are costing hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds, something that's relatively trivial, he would think. Or things like the soap opera in Sydney that was being constructed at the time. The immense cost of this thing, which again seems kind of trivial when you pit it against something like an entire nation starving of famine. And he's saying, okay, well, on the individual level, we're not doing enough, and at the government level, we're not doing enough. Pretty straightforward. Most people can kind of like agree with the arguments so far. Key assumptions that they just kind of went over is that suffering is bad. You can disagree with that. I, you know, I certainly have like come into like conversations where people do agree with that, but also that we can prevent a lot of the types of suffering in the world that are going on. So he uses his famous example. You guys have probably heard about it, but the drowning child example. Like imagine you are just like walking down the street or outside of your house and you see a child drowning in a kiddie pool face down or like in a pond or something. Most people would say that you have a type of moral responsibility, moral duty to save this child since it's fully within your capacity and there is minimal downside. The worst thing that could happen is you get your shoes wet or you get some mud on your clothes. He thinks that there is great insignificance of the sacrifice you'd be giving, wet shoes, um, in contrast or compared to the severity of the harm, the death of a child. It says, okay, as long as you can follow along with this, that we ought to save this drowning child when it doesn't mean, when it's not a big sacrifice to us, then we can start extrapolating to more global issues. Um, he doesn't think that the proximity or distance plays a philosophically or a moral role when it comes to determining your action. He does go ahead and say that there's a big practical implication, right? Because maybe if the kid is 100 kilometers away, it's hard for you to get there. But even though there are practical barriers, it has nothing to do with the moral or the moral actions you should be taking. He goes along the line, or he introduces this kind of idea of a global village. So like most people would say, yeah, if you see your neighbor's kid drowning, you have to help it. 1,000 years ago, or a couple hundred years ago, it was kind of impossible to leave your village. To get a message onto the other side of the world would take years or months or something like that. That's not the case anymore. And it's not the case that we are ignorant or we have the inability to get to different places. Literally, all it takes is a couple clicks, a couple texts, or get onto a plane, and then within a couple hours, you're on the other side of the world. Back then, this did play a practical role in how we should act and save people, but nowadays it doesn't really work. He kind of he says here that from the moral point of view, the development of the world is as this global village kind of makes it different in how we should act and treat other people. So he then kind of criticizes people who don't give to charity, which is it's like a bit of an uncomfortable thing to say. You're doing moral wrong when you're not donating to charity. But he attacks this idea of suffragatory that some theologians and philosophers kind of take up. They make the claim that certain actions are good when you do them, but it's not bad if you don't do them. So if you're asked to donate to no significant cost to you, he is saying that instead of it being not good if you don't give, it is actually wrong if you don't give, in a moral sense. Withholding funds to buy non-essentials. So when you go and buy like designer clothes, things you just don't need, a fancy new car, and so on and so on. All of these types of things are actual moral wrongs. They're not just indifferent or trivial spendings. When someone goes on vacation and spends, $5,000 at a resort, that is a moral wrong, according to Singer, because that money ought to have been spent to help or save people. Because quite literally, sometimes it's the case where just using that money towards organization, foundation, directly leads to saving lives, like malaria pills in Africa, or stopping clean water in places like around India. Like a lot of really, really easily preventable things can be solved. There's no mental gymnastics you have to do to kind of reason your way to that. There's some objections, obviously some very, very clear objections when it comes to this line of thinking. And he kind of shows us the two common objections. I don't know if you guys have read any Sidgwick or Urmson, but they were, how can I, when they had this idea, or Sidgwick at least, he had this idea that everyone should be able to arrive to moral truths if you have a functioning mind, like if you have like decent reason, you're like decently capable, any individual should be able to understand moral rules, moral principles. Things like murder is wrong, right? These are things you can arrive to through reasoning alone. You don't need to, be taught this type of stuff. So they believed in these types of truths that we can all arrive at. However, he states, if moral rules exceed ordinary capacities, people may abandon them altogether. So if rules that we implement or that we abide by in society are no longer reasonable, or they cannot be grasped by the average person, we just kind of let go of them and don't follow along with them. That's the first kind of common objection, that it's too drastic to tell someone that when they're not giving money to charity, they're doing something bad. Far too drastic to say that when you're buying designer clothes, you're doing something bad. So that's like one pushback. The other one is kind of a utilitarian one. It says, well, if we have this moral duty to be giving constant, or to be giving to like these causes to prevent suffering, prevent pain, then it kind of means that we should be working as much as we can all the time and giving everything we have, to people in need and people suffering. That would mean basically never retiring, never going on vacation, never taking time off if you don't have to, and then take all of the money that you make there and give it to charity. This is also a bit of like a unreasonable thing to assume of people or to ask of people. It's kind of like just putting your whole life down to become a activist, philanthropist. Not a lot of people are going to do that. Given present global suffering, he said, it does follow that we ought to morally be working full time to relieve great suffering. So he actually thinks that the morally correct thing to do is to work your full time job, live incredibly frugally, give everything you have. That is the moral right thing to do, the morally righteous thing to do. So that kind of like ties into the question of, okay, how much do we give? If someone asks us to donate, we can give $2, or we can, decide to only have one meal a day and give the full $500 from our paycheck or something like that. How much should we give then, Peter Singer? And he says there's two ways we can answer it. One is the one he believes, the strong version. And then two is the more moderate version, the one that people can go along with a little bit easier. The strong version is basically give as much until those who you are helping, or until you are in the position a little bit better than those you are helping. So basically, if there are people dying of starvation, you should give just up until you are not dying of starvation. So basically, everything. And only then, only once the suffering is more or less equal, or once you just kind of can't give anymore, that's when you should start, when you should stop. And he calls this marginal utility. He kind of uses some like utilitarian terminology. And then there's the moderate version. This one's like a bit more nuanced, and I guess it can get really, really tricky with specifics depending on the situation. But the way he defines it as, or he kind of says, well, you need to give until you're sacrificing something morally significant. What morally significant means to each person is going to be a little bit subjective. It's going to be very like nuanced. So it's hard to say or hard to give definitive examples when he's proposing this moderate version, because you could say like what paying for your education is a morally significant interest, and if that's the case, then you should keep the money for your education as opposed to giving all of it away. But I guess this just depends on what you deem to be significant for yourself and for your family. So this is the more palatable version, the one he doesn't believe is what we should do, doesn't believe it's the right answer. Then the strong one is the one that he believes is the correct thing to do. So obviously he's saying that government should be giving a lot more and not spending money trivially, like on opera houses or on, I don't know, the examples I gave before, like building like supersonic jets and so on. But then there comes this kind of like responsibility question, and it basically, most people will say, okay, well, when there's these huge crises around the world, no one person is kind of responsible for them. Usually they are systemic issues, like very, very wide issues with tons and tons of factors. So maybe it doesn't make all sense to pit everything on one person. It's kind of like everyone's responsibility to have to solve the problem or to help solve the problem. And then people go on and say, well, this is just the government's issue. The government should be the ones giving it because they're the ones with the money. It shouldn't be private individuals or just people by themselves that should be giving. It should be the government that's kind of responsible. And he says, well, two things can be right. Two things must be right in this case. It can be the case that you give, and it can also be the case that the government gives. And there's nothing wrong. There's nothing contradictory about both things being true. So you need to, as you give, also encourage the government to give. And that's kind of what he's saying. Other than that, there isn't too much else he goes in depth in the paper. So I'll kind of leave it open-ended on just kind of like ask you guys, what you think about giving to that extent. because it seems a little bit extreme or unintuitive, but his arguments are sound here as long as you accept the first premises of suffering being bad and that we can prevent suffering. So yeah, that's all I have to say. What do you guys think about it? You guys think we should give absolutely everything? I guess not.
I mean, I just don't buy it. I think the first premise, the one about suffering, is misleading because it pushes you into this false dichotomy where you either agree that all suffering's bad, or you agree that suffering isn't bad. And there's a more nuanced position there where you may agree that suffering's bad, but you may just not agree that it's bad to the extent that you'd be willing to make any sacrifices for it. Or you may also just view certain sufferings as some people may see suffering of a close family member as a sufficient condition to give, but they may not see the suffering of someone who they're not familially or even acquainted with as a friend to be a sufficient condition to give. And I think those, yeah.
Yeah, no, go continue.
The last thing is I think those propositions are just as just as much as a simple it's a proposition just like the suffering one. You have to agree at the beginning for his arguments to take hold.
Yeah. Well, do you agree that preventable suffering is bad in any form? So there's types of like necessary sufferings, like when you're exercising, things kind of hurt a little bit. There's a little bit of exercise, a little bit of pain going on there, but it's for like a purpose. But what about like just like suffering that doesn't seem to have a point? Famine, poverty, and so on.
Well, I'm not saying that those sufferings are good or bad, but I think the point with most of those is most people agree that if it would take no effort, they would rather them not be there. But they can also hold the same belief to say that the moment that it costs even $1 for them, they're just not willing to take action to alleviate the suffering.
So he talks about that as a psychological issue or a practical issue, but not necessarily a moral one. So like giving $1, it starts to be like burdensome. There might be like guilt in your head, or you might have like a tight budget, or things like that are practical. But like as a moral rule, he's saying that no, you should always, if you have the means, you should give. He's not saying that the poor person must give $1, but he is saying that the person who just kind of like throws money around should be giving this $1 or more if they can, which is reasonable to me, at face value at least.
I agree. I would say that it's I think that the same way he presents that proposition to say that you either agree that like suffering's bad. If you don't agree, that's it. Like don't read my essay. But I think it's the same thing where it's like if you just don't agree, you may agree that suffering's bad, but you may not agree that suffering is bad to the extent which it compels you to actually want to alleviate it. And I think that's the same thing. Like some people, they might just not hold that belief, and that's it. The argument kind of ends there.
Like whether or not we're compelled to help is a different question than whether or not we should help. It's like no longer. It's like a psychological thing as opposed to a normative statement. Like whether or not I help is just like a choice that depends on a bunch of things. But whether or not I should help is the meta statement or the meta claim, which I don't know. It makes sense to me. Even though I'm an absolute hypocrite because I don't follow those guidelines most of the time. I spend my money in like stupid ways. Like I didn't need that bottle of lemonade there. Could have just had water and then given that money away. Um, but it's not. But in practice, things get in the way. I don't know. I don't know how to phrase it.
I see the normative in the like to me, the normative claim ultimately I would say the ultimate goal of any normative system is to compel people to donate. I think it may be there's some the framework that results in in you acting is different than the what you would call the non-normative thing. It might be that I like this person, so that's the psychological mechanism that causes me to like them.
Yeah.
But if you feel compelled by principal arguments, it's still ultimately the at the end of the day the main thrust of that is to get you to donate.
hmm Yeah, and I think that's where I think the first objection from Stidgwick is it's pretty strong because people need to be able to arrive to those moral truths or those normative statements, um, or else nothing will be done. Because like I think he gives the example in the paper. It's like you can have a normative statement like murder is wrong. People can kind of understand that very clearly in society, so they won't murder. But now introduce another normative claim that's less palatable, something like, okay, murder is wrong, and you should be giving all of your excess money or like extra 10% tax to charities every year. No longer will that be followed just because people can't really grasp it or understand it or intuit it very easily.
Well, the way that I see the intuition point is, so the argument he puts forward of the drowning child and then getting your shoes wet. It's the way in which people react. I see that as like a distribution graph where you have the averages and you have the two extremes. And the majority of people are willing to get their shoes wet to save somebody's life, uh, at least in a theoretical way. But the what I don't see being the case is that like you still find people on the opposite ends of the spectrum. Maybe you find some really rich snobby guy he just doesn't share that intuition to say that he just isn't willing to make that get the shoes wet to save that kid. And the majority of people are going to look at him and be like, well, what an asshole. But ultimately, it's just a difference in those two intuitions.
But I still don't think it changes the like the guy's an asshole, correct? But it still holds that you should save the kid, and I think that's the force of the argument.
Well, the should is contingent on you sharing the intuitions that he puts forward at the beginning. And I'm trying to introduce one that I think he kind of sneaks by, which is to say that it's not just that you see suffering as bad, but you see suffering as bad as a sufficient as like a sufficient force to compel you to act. Because if you don't see, in the same way that uh, that's the mechanism that he puts forward when he's talking about the cases where like you should give, but only insofar as you're in the extreme case leveling yourself to that same to their same level. Well, that's the mechanism to say that like you might agree that suffering is bad, but the means of the way which you react or take that intuition and the different courses of action that you'll take, that's in itself another mechanism that requires shared intuitions.
I'm trying to think if I would ever, or if you would ever come across someone who says that isn't a psychopath, that you shouldn't save the kid. Have you guys met any of those
I
people?
mean, like even if they are a psychopath or whatnot, like fundamentally they just don't share that intuition. And that's kind of the point. It's like the argument stops there as long as you don't share that intuition. I think his argument succeeds because he hides the sort of mechanism to say that like he's just saying, oh, as long as you buy the suffering is bad, all these arguments follow. But the second sort of the hidden component say like you have to also buy that suffering is bad to the extent that it's going to compel you to act. If you don't buy that intuition,
Yeah,
I don't think his arguments
it's
follow.
not so much about being compelled to act as opposed because he says like yes, when there's the kid drowning, there are psychological things that will get in the way. Are there other people watching? Maybe that'll kind of make you want to be a bystander. Are you nervous about hurting the kid more, or do you just freeze because you're afraid, or do you like have a flight response? All those types of things, or like nervous things. That's how people will stop to be compelled. But like outside of an emergency, outside of being under all this stress, I think like, this is a big claim, but I think everyone would intuit that you should save the life. If it doesn't really mean anything to you. It means getting your shoes wet. And I think that's I don't know,
Right,
that's
but I
what
think
works.
the I think it's like the point is that like you still require some mechanism that judges when the effort is too great or too little
Hmm.
required to save that kid, and whether that results in whether you will or won't save the kid. And I think the point is that like he sets the bar so low with that mechanism that it seems to just be the case. Like, oh well, if you're willing to give a little bit, like if it, to no cost to you, you're willing to save this kid,
Hmm.
isn't a dollar the same thing, or isn't that? But the intuition there is different to say that like when I'm presented, if I have to get shoes shoes wet to save a kid, that's one cost that requires one intuition to say that is a price I'm willing to pay for X.
Hmm.
But if I say that $3, $4 to donate to a charity, that in itself requires a separate intuition.
Yeah.
And so the moment that one of those intuitions isn't shared, I think that's where his arguments don't succeed.
Yeah, so that's where he kind of comes up with his strong and moderate version, or his strong and moderate proposals for how we should act. He knows that it's very, very unreasonable and just like unlikely for everyone to share the same like uh what's it called, like super altruism that he has. So which is why he proposes like, okay, well, I know people aren't gonna go along with, giving their arm and leg for a guy across the world. But what about if we just said, give unless you are sacrificing something morally significant? And then there's a lot of like wiggle room between when someone's gonna help, when someone's not gonna help. But it leaves like a huge gap in how we act, or in like in the dissonance between like our like the idea of like, oh, we should be saving people, helping people, and then how we're actually acting in day to day. I think.
But if you allow that discretion, then there's no. Someone could very well say, like someone just their intuition could be the case that um, the moral worth of me getting my shoes wet is not is significant enough that I don't want to help that child.
Yeah, I think he would have to bite the bullet on that one. However, it's pretty reasonable to assume that most people in the world would act otherwise. Most people in the world would say, yeah, if it just means getting my shoes wet, I'll save the kid. And I think that's the he's trying to push those types of actions more onto people, like a couple dollars instead of the coffee. Most people will agree that a coffee is not worth the life of, a kid who needs to get vaccinated or something like that, or like emergency treatment on the other side of the world. Um, but there will still be people who says like, no, that's too much of an inconvenience. The coffee is more morally significant than the life of that kid, on the other side of the world. To those people, he just put his hands in the air and be like, oh well, like if you actually deem a cup of coffee as more morally significant than a kid, then I guess he has nothing to say there.
What the thing that bugs me is that if the metric that we're using to judge this is the how people are going to react to the kid stance,
Mhm.
we also have the same judgment to be made in how people are going to react to the morally significant stance. That is the case. That is to say that the majority of the people across the world aren't willing to make the sacrifice of coffee or this or that
Mhm.
um, for those kids. So it's like it just stands to be the case that if we just look at the world today and see how rational, reasonable people are reacting to
Mhm.
moral injustices, then we get our answer to what people consider morally significant. People are not willing to stop. They're not going to stop buying iPhones despite it being, let's say a moral good for the sweatshops or whatnot, or fast fashion, all these things. They're willing to bite the bullet and say all these conveniences are worth the moral suffering.
Yeah, I think he's just trying to draw an equivocation between, because like the drowning kid right in front of you, it's like a very visceral, emotionally charged, like you can kind of understand it very clearly. And then he's like, well, that's how it worked like 1,000 years ago. When we had to act morally, it was always like in our face. Like, someone's sick in our village, uh, a puppy is yelping. It's like always in our face. But now, thanks to like the global village, thanks to everything being so connected and basically, yeah, everyone, like every society just being so connected to each other, um, with other ones, it's just like it's the exact same thing as helping out your neighbor. Since we have the understanding and knowledge of the things going on around the world, and I think he's just trying to like equivocate the visceral reaction of like the kid drowning in the pool, and then how one to one it is with the equivalent sacrifice for an equivalent preventable harm on the other side of the world. And if you follow that and if that's consistent to you, if it's logically consistent that all lives are equal, it only costs wet shoes basically, or like a couple dollars to save a life, even if it's not close to you, then you should do it. But I think this is where people's like
Mhm.
psyches get in the way, because more often than not, we don't help because we're following like moral axioms. We help based off of like emotion. I'm gonna donate to my friend's thing because my friend was nice to me, as opposed to I have a moral obligation to pay or to donate to that like thing. I think that's, yeah, a big.
I think that's a particularly important point for like moral philosophers. Though, if it is the case that we don't act based on moral axioms, then what point is there to develop moral axioms if they're not going to have the ultimate impact of actually affecting our change? Why not move to a more practical frame of thinking where the way we compel people is through consequential, practical arguments? If if just the matter of fact that Peter Singer has to go through the like if he goes through this legwork and just comes to a conclusion, well, like the reason that people don't act this way is because there are other considerations. Well, why don't we? Those considerations clearly seem to be the more significant cause for the what he deems to be,
Yeah,
the bad, all that.
I guess he's trying to push the person who does want to arrive to moral truths um through like a theoretical framework. He wants to push those people to act more, because I don't know, me at least, I feel like I always try my best to act in accordance, not to my emotions or not to psychological things, even though that's it's always going to be the case. But I'm going to try at least to follow um, arguments and axioms when it comes to moral things, as opposed to just because I feel like it or because I was happy that day or something like that. And I think he's trying to convince those people, the people who want to act off of axioms, to act in these moral ways or in these ways that he's suggesting. But you're definitely right in saying that most people do not act in accordance to like universal rules and stuff like that. I don't know. Would you say you act on universal rules? Would you say like you don't kill, like you don't murder just because it's wrong, or you don't murder because it would make you feel bad?
No, I picked the latter.
You don't kill because it would make you feel bad.
Yeah, that's just not something I want to do.
So there's nothing non-subjectively, or there's nothing. So it's kind of like trivial then. It's just like about like how you feel. I'm a bit blown away.
Well, I just think like I don't see like the. I think we've had this question before about like the my view on moral frameworks, but I want to give somebody else a chance to talk because I've been yapping for the past. You know.
Does anyone else have intuitions about moral or how we act morally? Whether or not you act off of universal principles or just because it makes you feel good?
Ask a question.
Sure.
Is morality subjective or objective?
Um, Good question. And I don't know, Daniel, what's your stance on that?
Um, I think morality is a. I'll give it a spiel. I'll try to be quick, but I think morality is a misnomer in the sense that the mechanism which we use for morality is that of right and wrong, and the mechanism which right and wrong, like when you unfold the mechanism of right and wrong, what you get is that you have to set a precondition for something to be right or something to be wrong. So the example I give everyone is to say like, if I tell you that what's the right road to my house, and you'll tell me, oh well, these are the. I'm not going to dox myself here, but like here, this is the roads that you take to your house. And then if I ask you, well, what's the right road to Chris's house? Give me a set of directions for that road. But if I ask you open ended, what is the right road? The question again, the question of what is the right X is contingent on there being some preset condition of what you mean to get from right. So that's what you see in Peter Singer's and in all frameworks of morality, is that they presuppose some intuition that you have to hold for you to arrive at that same conclusion. And so I think that the fault in these moral frameworks are, I would say that maybe not the fault. The cleverest moral frameworks, what they do is they are able to hide intuitions as just being truths. So what I think Peter Singer's the reason I think Peter Singer's arguments is so successful and so popular is that the thing he talks about, the thing I was mentioning about earlier about the intuition, to say like to what extent is uh, a state of affairs in under there, because the only intuition that he does admit puts forward is the one about saying that suffering is bad. But even then, like, it's not so much that suffering is bad, it's that there's just a initial dislike of suffering. It's because there is no criteria given. There is no set of metrics that you use to evaluate whether suffering is good or bad. You're just saying, you're saying this is just the right road. The right road to what? So it's my long-winded answer to say morality is it's, to me it seems more like an illusion that we use to mask our intuitions.
Would anyone else want to answer before I do? Well, I think I'm becoming more sympathetic, or as of recent, maybe the past couple of years, I've become more sympathetic to a type of like idealism, or like, yes, that there are objective morals. However, the difficulty isn't in their existence, it's in us kind of arriving to them or getting at them. The best way being through reason. But I don't think we can ever get to it exactly. Like, you can imagine like this being morality. We can like always get close to it, and maybe some people will be like really, really close, and they'll be like almost completely moral. But it's almost like in this theory of forms, like using Platonic language, it's like this like thing that we can never reach, but only aspire to get close to. Like, you can never draw a perfect circle, but you can get kind of close. And I think when we're talking about objective morality, no individual will be able to get a grip of it, like put their arm around it, but we can get kind of close and we can try. Um, Things like slavery being bad, killing being bad, those things, they would probably be shared in this like group of like ultimate moral things. Other things, we might be further away or more confused about and can't get very close. But I think it's through reason that we can at least understand part of the objective morality kind of world up there. But I don't know. I was also sympathetic a little bit before that to Daniel's, like to your position or to your stance. So I'm still kind of undecided, but more sympathetic to the objective.
I like that answer.
Like, we can never, so long as I think Sidgwick's whole, or me like paraphrasing, Sidgwick's whole argument is that so long as a person has functioning cognitive capacity, a decent ability to reason, that person can get really close to this objective, to the objective morals. If a person was, locked away in a cage his whole life, or like never learned language, or just like didn't become a fully developed human, then he would not be able to get close to any of these universal morals. But for people like you and me, I would assume we have some ability to think and like and to reason. We can get kind of close, or we can at least arrive at the axioms. Things like murder being bad always, or suffering being bad, preventable suffering always being bad. I don't. I'm still trying to think about whether or not there would be a person who would kind of be like, no, suffering is good. Unnecessary suffering is good.
I mean, most religious folks, I think, have that view that I think that like it's not so much unnecessary suffering is good, but it's they have to bite the bullet and say that it's a requirement or in some way necessary
Yeah.
for the ultimate good, which is God.
Yeah, whether or not suffering is necessary or preventable, or whether it's necessary or unnecessary, people would disagree on that. But fewer people, even the religious people, I think they would also agree that unnecessary suffering, whatever they end up classifying that as or giving an example of as, they would say that unnecessary suffering is bad. But things that are necessary to suffering for divine reasons or for afterlife reasons, I don't know. They would be like, oh no, that's all of that type of suffering is necessary. If someone want, I don't know. Yeah, this paper made me think a lot about how much like it was kind of an exercise for me to think about what's morally significant or what that like as a subjective or personal thing, what it means for something to be morally significant. If I want to abide this like moderate proposal that Singer is giving us, and I hate to say that like a very very like greedy or egotistical. Like I might even go as far as saying something like I don't know, having like snacks in my fridge is more morally significant than donating that money to a charity, which I don't like. It makes me feel uncomfortable.
I think that's just a bullet. Like I think that the conversations that we have and maybe the how do I put this? It's almost like the way that we view ourselves and the way that we view most people tends to be a significantly superior moral construct than what we actually are. We sort of view ourselves in our prime or in our best case, sort of ourselves as the apex, but we ignore maybe the what's the word, the aspect of ourselves that is just maintenance. You know, like wake up, go get food. The 90% of our lives when we're just in autopilot,
Yeah.
and we look at ourselves in these like max.
Super
Like when I
altruistic.
talk to someone, I don't. Yeah, like we're presenting ourselves in our best capacities. But I think the reality of the situation is that for the most part, we are like as I was saying with Peter Singer's point. If you look at the just everybody in the world, what we're saying with our actions and what is just the case, and I don't think that it's like we should be better, we should be worse. It's just like it is just the case. Like people are more than happy to allow things that traditional like moral realists will say are bad, so long as it affords them some convenience or some benefit, and it's sufficiently hidden or like not face value. Like nobody's gonna use their iPhone if every time they unlock their iPhone they have to watch a 30-minute video of some guy hanging themselves because he spent his whole life in an iPhone factory. But as long as it's not sufficiently emotional and it's hidden away and it allows affords them some benefit, they're willing to make that sacrifice every time.
I think some people do go ahead and kind of renounce the convenience of all those things. I mean, if they didn't, there wouldn't be, I don't know, people who just only buy thrifted clothes or never buy new clothes.
Aesthetics.
There wouldn't be people who are like go vegan or stuff like that. Maybe it just takes, I don't know.
I mean, I certainly think there are people, but you can also flip that to the other end of the spectrum to say that there are certainly people who go, maximally materialist at the expense of people suffering and good, billionaires who employ the equivalent of slave labor, countries who subjugate others. Like there's individuals who benefit and they're willing to make that sacrifice every time. I don't think But I think the average case is usually just, yeah, I'm gonna use my iPhone. I don't like, I'm gonna buy the next iPhone. Well, to hell with whatever.
Yeah, I think we're getting close to. There's like the what ends up being morally permissible. It's like, okay, cool. Like things like using your iPhone becomes morally significant. You kind of need that to communicate with people and to work your life. But at the beginning, at least, of this paper, he was focusing a lot more on huge, uh, what's the word? Huge, like extravagant expenses. So things like, I don't know, buying a mega yacht, right? Like the amount of money that's going into that, or like those types of decisions, or buying like a supercar when you're not an F1 driver, or things like that. Um, it's like those types of examples that are way more clear cut than whether or not you should use an iPhone, or whether or not you should give most of your paycheck to charity. And the average person um, is never in this realm of extravagant expenses. It's only like the at the government level, and then at the ultra rich level, um, that concerns themselves with that. I feel like it's a little bit unfair to maybe it's like a little bit harsh on ourselves to be forced to choose between like having an iPhone or getting a cup of coffee in the morning and donating it, when the more clear cut things are just like the extravagant expenses um at the
I
rich.
mean, how many super yachts does it take to equal 30 people dying?
Probably like a very small amount of a super yacht, I would think.
No, I just mean like, okay, why, like, again, this is the intuition to say, like, the guy who's buying the super yacht
Mhm.
just has that intuition that that super yacht is worth more to him than the 30 million that goes to charity, or the 30 million that would go to build a house in Uganda, and that's just it. That's just an intuition that he has, just how he be.
Is it, or I think it might be ignorance or lack of thought that goes into it. If you sat him down and you asked him that question, he'd maybe think about it a couple times. Psychological biases and pride and all that type of stuff apart or aside. He would maybe think about it for a second and be like, oh, okay, wait, actually, this huge stupid amount of money it's way more important to save a couple lives than for me to get a good yacht and like look good to my other rich friends. Maybe.
I don't think so.
No?
No, I think, like, no billionaire is gonna, like, you have a conversation with a billionaire. I don't think any of them are gonna outright be like. Very few are gonna outright be like, yeah, like, fuck the poor man. I just want to ride around in my F1 car. They're trying to give you some principled argument, but I think that comes from the societal point where they're like, it's seen as a taboo to be affluent, to be extravagant, to be like these incredibly materialistic. So and just it's not, it's bad PR to walk out in front of a bunch of people and be like, I'd rather spend 30 billion on this super yacht so that I can sunbathe with supermodels
Hmm.
than help 1,000 kids go to school in Africa or save 100,000 lives from malaria or whatever the equivalent is.
It's like, how
But I
often
mean,
do people actually think about like, I don't know, like when most people buy these, or I would assume when most people like buy a new car or like fancy clothes or something like that, the the concept of charity is like, it hasn't even entered their mind. It's nowhere there. Um, it's just like, me, cool. I'm like living in my life in my little world. This would be nice for me. This would bring me some pleasure. But the example of the drowning kid right in front of you, where it becomes more immediate, and in those situations, then maybe there would be some friction with how they're spending their money, or like where, yeah, how they're spending that money.
I mean, most billionaires have some charitable foundation that they own, or do give some charity. So they're at the very least they have to confront the fact every year that charity exists, and they're going to give some money to it, even if it's for tax benefits.
Yeah.
But they go to and they speak at some event that they host to say, like, this is what I'm donating to, this is what I care about. So, like, I would say it's not, charity isn't absent in the mind of most billionaires.
Mhm.
It's there, and I think the fact that they do have a charitable foundation means that they see, for them, the what the morally significant good is to say, it's like, oh, I have a net worth of 30 billion, I'll donate 1 billion, or I'll donate 500 million, and Any more than that is too morally significant that I'm willing to give.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess Singer just has a far, what's the word, like a very, very low threshold for what morally significant when it comes to money. What's morally significant to you? What amount of money?
To me,
Yeah. Like if the drowning child's right in front of you, like a visceral experience. Like at what point would you be like, yeah, I'd rather not. Just too much. I'm like I'm investing too much, or like this is too much of a sacrifice.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It entirely depends on the child.
Random child.
I think. Well, that's the thing is like I think, and this is gonna sound absolutely disgusting, but I think this is just how like what I see. It's like is how similar is a child to you? Are you acquainted with that child? All these things are I think significant. Have you had bad experiences with someone that looks like that child in the future? Does a child look like your childhood bully?
Hmm.
All these things in the tangible, like in the theoretical space, the abstract life of one child is all good and all, but practically speaking, when you actually that price is going to fluctuate. There's going to be like a market price on that child.
Hmm.
It's going to fluctuate based on the market. What the market says. Um, if I see a child that looks oddly like me, I'm probably gonna jump in just because there's that empathetic response. But if there's a child that looks nothing like me, or like let's say an alien child, like
Hmm.
not I don't mean like a legal immigrant, but I mean like extraterrestrial. I think that the buy-in cost for people is going to be a lot more significant, even if it's for all intents and purposes it's a living thing, but it's a living organism that's so alien from what we look like, from what our response. Like if the way that alien shows a pain and suffering, and that it's drowning, and that it's a suffering, is starkly different to us, the buy-in is going to be significantly higher, even if we're rationally aware that they're experiencing pain and suffering.
Well, with all that being said, hypothetically, since you're obviously more aware than the average person of their biases and of a tendency to help someone that might look like you, and so on and so on. Keeping all that in mind, would you still save that child or alien?
I don't think that the answer to that question it matters, because there's a practical answer there
Mhm.
that is going to be a lot more significant in how I actually interact with the world and what I actually do in my life.
Does
Because I think this is what I was saying about.
for you?
I think theory forms a nice framework, but for example, like what I was saying about the intuitions,
Mhm.
um, like in the intuition might be that, yeah, I'm willing to save a child, but when I'm actually confronted with it, I don't know, maybe that child looks like my childhood bully, and I'm like, actually my buy-in cost is 10 grand higher, and you're gonna look at me, well, like, no, in theory you said you do this, yes, but there's another intuition now at play now that I'm in a tangible thing. And so that's why I think ridding ourselves of every intuition except for a single one might be good for some interesting conversation, but I think it offers little in the term of building practical theories to apply in the real world.
I think, well, I mean, personally, for me, theory has always informed. It's like a very, very strong framework for like how I act and everything I do. Um, like upon understanding to me that like uh all sentient life, or all life that can experience pain to to like advanced, I want to say, degrees, or to like complex degrees, um should be saved. So I kind of like I've forced myself a little bit to go along the lines of saying, okay, well, every single animal is has like a similar life value if they have like developed nervous systems. Therefore, the life of a dog is the same of a pig. I wouldn't eat a dog, so I won't eat pigs, or I won't eat meat, or I'll be
Do you eat any meat?
no, unless it's a survival situation or something like that. But for me, theory has always informed
Really?
my practice, or how I act in life. Like if the framework is perfect, ideal. If I can get close to it, then in practice things will line up with it a little bit more. It's like it's because of these theoretical frameworks of all life being equal, pain being bad, and then you run down the argument and see, okay, well, this just means that if I don't want to be a hypocrite and I want to be intellectually consistent and honest with myself, then I need to act in certain ways. Will you slip up? Yes, because in practice things aren't always perfect, like in theory, but you can get a lot closer. I don't know, like my practice can, or practically, I end up acting a lot differently than I would have if I didn't follow theory as a strong.
No, I see what you mean. I think there's a lot of like I have a lot of respect for you for people who have ideals and follow them. I think there's some thing I guess like maybe it's a semantical difference, but there's some things that I really care about that I will follow or try to um like I care about my friends and there's certain things like I want to do for them and do that. But I'm always hesitant to like elevate that to theory or to some principle or anything. There's just things that I want to do or things that I like and care about. And the things that I like and care about shift and change based on my circumstance, and that's what ultimately results in me making a decision. Yeah.
Fair, fair. I totally get that.
What's your price
I was trying to think
for a
about
child?
I was trying to think about that today, and I didn't know it all. 'Cause I want to say like a huge high number, but then I'm just at the risk of being a complete hypocrite with my actions. But
Well,
maybe
the
I'm
like I think that people's prices is a lot lower than people think because somebody might throw out like 20K or something, but then I'll tell you like, okay, uh, I'm gonna, it's like you can, we can go right now on Air Canada's website, find a ticket for like 3K, send you to some remote village or join the Peace Corps. I don't know, like send you to some village in Ecuador and you are gonna purchase life saving malaria drugs to this child. And it's gonna cost you a lot less than 20K. Then why don't you do it?
because I might value time a lot higher than money, is what I would say.
Okay, but if we like, you could probably do that trip in 1 week. And I'm assuming like right now you're traveling, you're in like you're doing something right now, like you're helping the dogs and whatnot. But after this, I'd say like I could probably find 1 week in across the year that you're free enough that you can go do this thing and spend the 20K.
My 20K?
Yeah, well, like assuming that your price is 20K. So again, like if your price isn't 20K, whatever your price is, I'm sure that I could find a way for you to spend that money on a child.
Yeah, no, no. Now you're saying it might be too 20K might be too morally significant. I would have to go and say like if I don't need to sacrifice a lot of my time, if it's feasible and all, a couple $100, like, because at that point I'm not sacrificing education or future or anything like that. Even maybe a couple $1,000. If I had more money, that number would go up, obviously. But broke philosophy student, so maybe my number would be a lot lower.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I know the struggle. Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think it's just like people people hate the idea that it's like this child is worth $300.
Mhm.
Uh, but that's where I think it's important to like, for me, I'm concerned with the practical or the actual like tangible in the sense of like no like there is, if we were to, in the same way that an insurance company has life premiums um and whatnot, and they will tell you like, okay, based on this you're worth this, or like in law there's like there's this big chart that people that you have. So for example, if you die at 23 and you're suing somebody for it, there's a chart that will say, well, based on statistics, uh, how many years would you have lived up, and then how much are those years worth, and you make a determination of how much their family or whoever their beneficiary is should be compensated. And in that sense, or in the same way, like certain companies, you say like the lawsuit I get every year for not fixing this thing, which is going to cost me millions, is a lower cost than fixing that thing. So I'm going to make that, like, these are just things, like we make those judgment calls every day. Those judgment calls exist, and if we look on a practical basis, uh, this is also like one of those I think implications that people are not willing to bite the bullet on. A child in South Africa is, for the intents of our discussion is worth less than a child in, the United States or Canada country, and that is just the case. It's not a moral or principled argument. It is just the fact that people are willing to pay more for children in North America, like from a altruistic standpoint, than those in Africa or whatnot.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's a matter of fact. But I feel like sometimes to just accept things as matter of fact and then leave them as they are is very dangerous, because then nothing would ever change. No good would ever come about the world. There would be no policy changes. There would be no movements, no charity work, no organizations, no good going around. So, like, yes, it is a matter of fact, but it doesn't have to be a matter of fact. And that's where I think I'm caught up on. Since it doesn't have to be the matter of fact, then we should actively try and do something to change that. Like, I'm not like pushing for anti-slavery in the hundreds years ago in America. Like, it was a matter of fact that you could own slaves, and this was the way things were, and a black man's life was worth X, Y, Z. But it didn't have to be the case in the future, and I think that was what was galvanizing and pushing people to make changes and make reform. So when we're like answering questions about is the life of a South African kid as valuable as the life of a American, as a matter of fact, nowadays, just know a Canadian kid is worth more on paper, to people, to governments, than a South African kid. But it doesn't have to be that way. And maybe I'm just really very
Yeah,
ideal.
but no, I 100% agree with you. Like, I think what I threw out there is just probably incredibly pessimistic. But what I see it to be the case is like, that's true, but the extent of which I think people are willing to say fight for I don't know. I mean, take this with a grain of salt, because I think this is I'm thinking of this right now, so maybe I'm jumping the gun a little, but I think the way I see it is people are willing to fight a lot less for what they believe in right now than they were during slavery. A whole civil war formed
Mhm.
because of, largely speaking, slavery and state rights. But nowadays, when there's a humanitarian crisis, I don't see anybody here in the West, very few people, taking up arms to go and fight for a cause they believe in. I mean, there's foreign volunteers in Ukraine and whatnot, but I don't see like all those folks who are heavily critical of Israel and feel that they're committing humanitarian, they're breaking international law, committing a genocide. I don't see them picking up arms and heading to Palestine to fight the Israeli government.
Yeah. Most
Um,
people don't, but some people do, and sometimes just those few people are enough to sway policy change and to actually just like change the way things are going in the world. But
yeah, but
it is very, very few and
in
far
the
between.
civil what I mean is, like, in the Civil War, you had hundreds of thousands of people on either side picking up arms to fight for what they believed in. Or even if you want to say half or a quarter of those, that's still a significant, like, that actually fought for what they believe in, not they weren't conscripted, or they weren't just like, they're like, whatever, I'll pick up a gun. As silly as that may sound, I think the equivalent just isn't the same. Like, I don't see, a cohort of 25,000 students picking up arms, going actually and risking their lives for something that they believe in. And I think, like, the relevance here to the point about, like, it is the case is, I agree. I think you can change states of affairs if you want them to, but I think you have to actually, like, if you're going to say that I will a state of affairs, like, I want to will a state of affairs to come to fruition, in that you have to include, I think you include, like, um I care about a state of affairs insofar that I will do this to this extent. And so when we're talking about the child, to say, like, well, I want to, I don't want African children to be worth. I don't think they should be worth $300. Um, if a Canadian child's worth 500, well, the question I would ask is, what are you doing to change that? What are you willing to risk for that? What's the price you're willing to pay? What's the sort of, like, the intuition there of the value judgment of what is valuable enough that you're willing to sacrifice for that? Um, and I feel maybe more pessimistic about saying this, because what I see is today people who are, back then I see people willing to die for causes they believe in. Today I see people willing to not even wake up early for things that they believe in.
Perhaps
You
in
know,
perhaps in Western culture and stuff, for a lot of global conflicts, but comes to local things, I think people very often fight for things. I mean, like any war, pick Ukraine and Russia. Like how many people when it's like presented to them in their face, how many people Ukrainians picked up a gun and arms? Like things are still, I don't know, people are still always willing to fight, but maybe we just in my lifetime, I haven't really seen it. But if I'm looking at it like in a broad like data, everything that's been going on globally for the past 500 years, things are continually getting better because the good fights have been being fought. Like less children are dying of malnutrition, less people are dying from preventable diseases. There's the poverty lines going up. There's less people dying of famine than 50 years ago, and so on and so on. So even though it might seem like from our small point of view, the way we kind of like look at the world in the 20 years or so that we've been alive, we don't see much change, and we see a lot of lazy people not doing anything. But if I zoom out a tiny bit, look at the just numbers, like sheer amount of infant mortality. Like no one would be fighting for science and like these research things and medicine and building hospitals if they didn't care for that. Things end up changing. But no, I totally agree. No one does, like I don't see anyone do it, or I see very very few people doing that. And I think I live in a pretty like activist bubble, um, like a very like selected, or just like I don't know what the word is, a very like niche group, like my friends and family and that.
What I see is people's intuitions, like what I mean, like when it comes to the value judgments, is to say it's like I'm willing to spend 3 hours a week talking and being vocal about this issue that I care about. But when like you take the equivalent and say it's like, okay, I get that, like a coffee shop that you really like closed on your street, or the government rezoned it, gotcha. But then you're going to tell me that that's the same thing that you're willing to do because you think that a government across the world is committing like an actual genocide, the equivalent of people equated to the Holocaust. Yet the actions that you're willing to take, they climax at holding a sign in the street for 3 4 hours.
Mm-hmm.
With, not even like 200 100 years ago, Britain was willing to enter. Soldiers were willing to or people were willing to join the army, enter a war that they weren't directly attacked to fight for those ideals, and or even the Civil War. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
It's because those things were affecting. It was more of a personal fight at that point than a something going on the other side of the world that I can't see. Because even 50 years ago, I find it hard to believe that a British soldier or someone from Britain would be like, oh, you know what? I want to go help the genocide in Indonesia going on right now. Like that's very unlikely to me. But because the war was in Britain and it was a personal thing, then people are very likely to pick up arms. And that's always going to be the case
Well,
because we only act in accordance to what we're presented with.
in the 1860s, France invaded Mexico and imposed a monarchy, and there was an entire there was what was formed. It was an Austrian king that was put in place, and he had formed a foreign legion where anybody that he had, I think it was like somewhere around 4,000 volunteers from Europe that had volunteered to go to Mexico halfway across the world to pick up arms and fight for this monarchy that they had. Well, they'd never met this king, they had no idea who he was, but it was an ideal that was appealing enough that they're willing to take up arms and go fight for it.
Was it happening in Ukraine and Russia? I mean, they've gotten thousands and thousands of international people signing up to fight for them. People with of Ukrainian heritage, anti-Russians, all that type of stuff. And there's still people who go out of their way to defend ideals, but maybe not as
No, but
seem historical or monumental.
what I mean is like, and also the case from World War II. It's like Britain was the only country that got involved in the war without being directly attacked. Every other country was directly attacked to actually enter the war. They entered because of a guarantee that they made to Poland. So, like that's what I mean to say. It's like in today's day, yeah, I think that like there are foreign legion volunteers in Ukraine, but I would say it's the exception. It's not the rule. Whereas I think back then, back in the 1800s or maybe back then. And again, maybe it's just a pessimistic view I have, but I see people willing to take up arms for ideals significantly more than I see them willing to take up arms for ideals in today's era. Even like indigenous rights here in Canada, like in the 70s, there was an armed standoff between the indigenous peoples and the Canadian military. It's like things like that. Like, I'm not saying again, I'm biased, but I think to me the things that I think people claim to be willing to fight for and to be great injustices, they're not willing to take the same actions that people 200-300 years ago were willing to take for the same things that they claim to be great injustices and horrible things.
I feel like these are empirically verifiable claims that we're making. I feel like you can search up like a percentage of the population that engaged in activism in any shape or form, or a percentage of or number of international volunteers for legions and stuff like that, and then we could get to the bottom of whether or not people are actually helping more or less than they were before, or standing up for ideals more or less than they
Well, even in like the States, like to say like I agree with you. I think the Foreign Legion thing is empirically verifiable, but I think other things get a little bit more muddy. Like when equating actions, but also saying like, well, a full account of people who actually profess to be in favor of the Palestinian state and a full account of people that are willing to go abroad and fight over. I think those are numbers that are going to be difficult to find. But in the States, like one of the other things I look to is say like, people claiming that Trump is tyrannical and whatnot, but they're not going to be willing to take up arms and actually like enforce that belief. Like if you fundamentally believe that in your country who fought to rid themselves of a king once and who's a republic and a democracy, and these are the ideals they uphold in, that they're being completely betrayed and that the current leader is an autocratic dictator, then should you like? Why is it that you act differently than those before you?
I think
why is it they're not willing to take up arms?
But I also think that the way fighting is done has changed a lot in the past 500 years. Before, fighting was always literally, knife in hand, you go to kill someone. But war or like fighting for ideals, that's changed so much. You can contribute just as much, if not more, to the outcome of battles or the outcome of huge national affairs, from your home. Imagine like a North Korean hacker. Their entire war, or Russian hackers, like their entire war is just I'm sitting at home doing this. It's not some epic battle, with a sword in hand. But I would still consider that a type of fight, or a drone operator, or people who are fundraising money and trying to fund causes. Like it might not be as glorious as picking up arms, but I think it's just as impactful as a fight, or as a physical fight.
Yeah, but I mean, like, I think like those still stand, but the point is like there's still I would agree if there was like, let's say, a small group in the United States that picked up arms and was like actually fighting to overthrow Trump, and then you had this massive these like it's like 20% of the people fighting are actually like picking up arms and fighting, and then you have 80% of the movement that's actually standing back, providing logistical support, hacking, getting money. That'd be one thing. But when there is no organized movement like that, and there is no equivalence, I don't see I don't see that to be the case. Like even when go ahead.
I think you need like a very particular state of affairs within a nation for people to find it reasonable enough to pick up arms, because like when people have picked up arms in the past, it's because the government already might be losing a bit of grip, they might be losing popularity, and so on and so on. Like there's tons of reasons and factors. The economy might not be very good, international things coming on. But when we're talking about something like the United States, like the powerhouse of the world right now, and the grip that they have and the military that they have, to pick up arms against them, even if you disagree, is so foolish versus in the Civil War when there was a chance that you could win, or like there was a and just the situation was different.
I mean, if the Taliban were able to wage a guerrilla war and actually exhaust the United States military with less, I would say like the average U.S. citizen has more military kit than like a Taliban soldier.
Yeah.
I might be exaggerating a little bit here, but that's to say it's like And look, we're not even taking into account that if the U.S. did go into a civil war, you would have like a split in the military. Like there would be parts of the military that would align with, you'd be forced to kind of pick a side in that sense. So it's not like if a civil war erupted in the U.S. that it would just be the entire force of the U.S. military to bear amongst the onto the people. It would be like any other civil war that's been where the military equipment like gets split. But also then there's breakup in supply. Like how is the military going to be able to like the U.S. is incredibly versed in waging war abroad, but they don't have experience fighting near peer like an insurgency at home. So there's just like I think that there is a case to be made where could break out in the States and that the insurgents have a chance of winning, or at least of
Yeah.
getting the U.S. to compromise on certain demands.
I think the dissatisfaction of the state of the state of the state of the states, the dissatisfaction isn't high enough yet for these things to play out. When they do get high enough, that's when civil wars break out. Arab Springs and stuff like that. But I guess it just hasn't gotten to that level of. It might feel like it because we're always online and you can hear everything everyone's saying all the time. But the actual that level of dissatisfaction in the country isn't at that level. Like people aren't starving. People aren't like they like those ideals, but it's not they're not dissatisfied enough with the way things are going for them to want to sacrifice their lives and go all in. Whereas somewhere like in
I mean,
the wars in Sudan and stuff, like the situation is dire enough for people to take gun in hand.
I think also it's I would say it's a little different in some of those states because it's not that like you're being born into a state of peace and then taking up arms. It's I think you're more so being born into a state of war and forced to take up arms.
Yeah.
But I think like the standards like don't claim if the standard for the I would say for waging civil war in the past to me seems to have been lower in the sense that like you infringe on state rights, you infringe on a person's ability to own slaves, and then that's sufficient condition for for a civil war to erupt. Or you're being ruled by a king, you're a colony, you want to have independence, you want to have a democratic system of government. The reason I see the equivalence in somebody saying, well, Trump's a dictator, Trump's this. Well, then go take up arms. Like if you fundamentally believe he's a dictator, and you no, again, I'm not a Trump supporter. I just don't think he's a like an autocratic dictator. But when people make the claims that he's sort of fascist, that he's going to be the end of that he's going to become this like mad king and destroy the United States, well, if I truly believe that, then I feel like I like to think that I would take up arms and go and actually fight for the things that I believe in, or even if it's not like you're saying, it doesn't have to be take up arms. I think it's that for me that's like a that's what I seem to be the case. But like go into a shed in the woods and start mailing bombs for your ideals type of like, bomber style or hacking. There's so many ways that you can actually take so many things you can do to actually affect the state of affairs that are outside what I think people prescribe to today, and that's the frustrating component for me.
Yeah. No, I feel like people may not be fighting physically as much as they were before now, but just out of the fact that we know what's happening around the world, there's this like global village, like Singer was talking about. Just out of that, people are fighting a lot more than they used to be, but just in indirect different ways. Like in Canada, at least, it's like you no longer buy American goods to try and push back on the whole tariff situation and him trying to lock down the country or whatever. I would still consider that a form of fighting. It just isn't as glorious as shooting someone and stuff. But no, I totally take your
my criticism isn't so much that people aren't fighting; it's that they're fighting to a lesser extent. So, for example, the equivalent, like if we really meant to strike at the heart of the U.S. economy, we would start building oil refineries in Canada so that we refine our own oil and then sell it, and that would really affect. That would be hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of U.S. revenue that they get every year from refining our oil.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be that we just stop buying the liquor that I buy at the LCBO that's made in the U.S. Or the equivalent is like if people in And the way that I see it is like if people who are protesting against Israel, sure, don't go and take up arms and fly to the Palestinian territories and take up arms, but don't just boycott like Starbucks, like hack into Israeli banks, start, there's like so many other things, like take, what I would say is, what I see is like, rather than just make your voice known, I don't see protest as a means of effectuating change. It's a means of stating your dissident for historians in the future. It's a means of making the people's voice known, so that historians in the future can say these people, there wasn't complete. Not everybody agreed with this action. But if you mean to actually take action, it's to look at the actors, or the actors which you think are benefiting from whatever it is that you're disagreeing with, and actually preventing their ability to benefit from those things. And that's the mechanism that I don't see taking form as much.
It becomes too much of a sacrifice to engage in that degree of escalation, though. I think sometimes, like it's just not
But
worth
people were willing to make it in the
like
past.
yeah, they've done it in the past, and it still happens, like, every now and then. But like, would cost too much to Canada to completely cut off from the U.S. and declare like full out trade war. Let's go. It's just not worth it at that point. That fight is not worth it. It would hurt us more than the good we would get from pushing back. And I think that's what, like,
We would get more if we built the refineries.
no, we'd sour the alliance way more than it has to, and who knows what the repercussions of that would be. It's just like the cost benefit to fighting back versus what it might cost us is not there yet for us to engage in those escalatory actions. I wouldn't think like that's
I think it's a sunken cost fallacy where, yeah, sure, immediately we might, and the same thing like what the Europe is doing, where um they're trying to not be dependent on U.S. military kit or the U.S. economy. It's going to suck, because they're going to have to dump all this money into their economy, into the military, and whatnot. But in the long term, they're going to have a stronger military and economic independence. Same thing with Canada. Like, immediately we might sour and have negative effects, but in the long term, we'll benefit greatly from having yeah.
how likely would it be for Trump to stay in office for 10 years for those benefits to pay off? It's just like,
Well, even it's not just Trump. It's if any president is elected at any point in the future who is slightly hostile, then that's where like, it's not just distancing itself economically, but it's like developing our industries, taking advantage of our comparative advantage on the global scale. And so that's where I think
it's a bad gamble to like put the country on a certain trajectory based off of a hypothetical, like, if this happens in the future, if things play out in this certain way. It's just not very prudent, in my opinion, to make like those big of moves because of possibilities in the future. You need to be like a little more, what's the word, like, careful. I don't know, but like not betting everything on one possible outcome, but rather spreading out like contingency plans for outcomes.
but that's the very rationale that put us in the position we're in. We put all our eggs into being friends with the U.S. For the rest of time, and now it's coming to bite us in the ass.
Well, that's because we didn't know the future. You can only bet as much as probability, or you can only act with the best estimates you have at the time. You can always look back and be like, oh, that was a dumb decision. You didn't have the information you have today than you did when you were making those decisions. The best thing you can do is say, what's the most likely outcome to happen? Let's prepare for that one. And I guess when we are making our ties with the U.S., the most likely outcome was that we become good trade partners, and things go well for both of us. But things changed. No one probably predicted Trump to be doing what he's doing and like all that stuff. So we lost the bet. Now we have to pivot. But I take what you're saying.
And also, wasn't it also just like the better, like if you think of it like a prisoner's dilemma situation, like the cooperation alternative is just like the better alternative. And if you diverge from that, if either actor diverges from that, you kind of end up in the situation where you just have a net worse situation. Like just historically, like a militarized Europe is usually not gonna end well. with each country, you know, investing heavily into its military. Like, it's just not a good sign for the future, even if we might have like relative advantages or disadvantages for individual countries. The net situation when Europe is, I guess, relying on the U.S. and the U.S. is relying on Europe, that kind of like cooperation seems to be like the best situation for everyone. No.
Yeah, it's usually the safest
What?
way to cooperate. Like that's the safer bet. And I think countries take the safer bets until it seems pretty obvious or likely that things will go sour.
Well, no, I mean, I think like
Safer. I think it's best, right? Like, it's just because safer implies. I mean, safety depends on what the other actor is gonna do
Mhm.
in any situation. But sorry, I just joined. Did we talk about Peter Singer already? Or did we finish that? What was the? What did you guys decide? Like, were you convinced by his argument?
I was very persuaded. Daniel has a more pragmatic view on states of affairs and stuff, but I was very persuaded. I don't know with this one, but I'm
Can
also
I
and
propose a criticism?
Hmm?
I don't think you're a hypocrite. I don't think Peter Singer's argument works. I think it's disanalogous. Like, I think the analogy he gives is not strong enough for the argument that he's making.
the drowning.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Because the drowning child one is sufficient to get to a situation where you justify why a person has an obligation for at least some charitable actions. I think I forgot who wrote it. I think it was like Tarvis Timmerman or something. But there's a smart guy. I'm not the first person to think of this. Okay, there's other people who've thought of this. But essentially, a more analogous hypothetical would be like if you had to service the rest of your life, infinitely saving drowning children without spending any money for leisure. And in that situation, in that hypothetical, it becomes way less intuitive
Mhm.
that you have that obligation.
Well, I think
Like, for instance, would you say, yeah,
I think he covers his bases there because he says we must help only insofar as it's not morally significant to us. So helping the drowning child is trivial, but flying across the world to
yes,
volunteer and sacrifice a year of your time, that is significant. So you don't have to do that.
yeah, that's the conclusion. But that rests upon the hypothetical he gives. Like, we can draw here. Okay, here, I guess I'll have to go into the hypothetical. Let's say right now there's a hacker that's taking let's say $100 from your bank account every 5 minutes. Okay, and luckily for you, the bank is really close by, so you can just walk to the bank right now. But on the way to the bank, you stumble across an infinite amount of ponds with drowning babies in them, and each one is going to take you 5 minutes to save each drowning child. Uh, it seems as though Peter Singer would imply that you have an obligation to keep saving drowning children in that infinite land of drowning children until you reach a point where the amount of money you have basically puts you at the position of the drowning child. No.
I disagree. That's what he would say. His strong position would say that, but not the moderate position. His moderate position would say, well, one, how much money do you have in your bank account, right? And that should more or less like dictate how much
Yeah.
time you have to save these things. But two, it's like at some point you have to stop saving the children. That's his moderate position. What that point is going to be different for every person, and it's up to them to decide. But so long as that money is not morally significant to you, then you keep saving the kids. But
okay,
once
sí,
that,
toman.
sorry,
From yeah,
No, con una no
from
toma mucho,
that
casi
sounds right.
nada.
From what I remember,
Oh.
didn't he himself like say the moderate position is wrong? Like, I remember him saying like, oh yeah, the moderate position is like better than not doing anything. But like, he still disagrees with it. He still says you're still being morally
he does agree with it.
immoral in that situation.
I have that. What was it?
So
It was
like
this. Yeah.
I think, yeah. So I guess that this would be my, yeah. It seems as though like the drowning child hypothetical justifies the moderate position, but I don't know how it gets you to the hard position where you have to keep going for the rest of your life.
Equal suffering or just a little bit. He says you should. What he believes is that you should give so much until you are a little bit better off than the Bengal and famished refugees.
Yes,
That's what.
but this is not like one transaction. This is the rest of your life.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to um to kind of like see like how you could put yourself in a position where you're equal to that kid, since you're both just totally different. You're not a kid. Uh, you're not really like swimming or anything. There's no way to like. No matter how many kids you save, you're never gonna be like the drowning kid. Whereas when you're giving money, you can get it's kind of close to like a level of suffering, like of poverty and just not having food and stuff. So you can kind of get to the same level, but
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to like take out a mortgage, sell my house, sell all my like all the expensive things that I can do away with. Like I would not.
or his
There's no way you could justify having like a shaver or anything like that
No,
to Peter Singer because there's no way the facial hair is
uh-huh.
as morally important as like giving money to someone who probably needs it more.
And I think
To
I
Peter Singer, yeah.
I hate to say this is why I was saying that I'm a hypocrite, because I follow his art. I believe that is the truly super altruistic thing to do. It's the morally right thing to do, but I'm not going to do it. So I'm biting the bullet there and saying I'm not a very moral person. I'm a hypocrite. I'm not.
No, wait, hold on, but that's not. Y- okay, like most people would say that that's a good thing to do, and that like is morally right. The question is like, is not doing it morally wrong, right? That's the ultimate question of
I also agree.
the. So like, would you say that if you also agree that like most people are evil people for not
I think
giving money
I don't
for the
know.
rest of their
I
lives?
don't know about they're evil people, but I would say like not donating to charity is a moral wrong when you have the means to donate to charity and it's of no moral like impact or significant impact to your livelihood. I would agree that that's a moral wrong thing you're doing. But again, hypocrite. I definitely could be donating more. I spend money in stupid ways sometimes, like I didn't need this wireless mouse or whatever. Um, but the normative argument kind of it still holds there. It just makes me cringe at myself.
Really? Okay. Wait. Okay, hold on. So let's say you have a person who's giving every single dollar they make to charity, like just every single one they make, and then like after 20 years of doing this, they're basically, I guess, metaphorically, they're saving drowning children, on and on and on, and then one time they just they really want to reminisce in the old days of going to the cinema and watching a movie.
Yeah.
You would say that that's wrong, that that like that, despite all the good they've done, they are now an immoral person. That could have been more moral
I
had
wouldn't say
they
that they're
fulfilled their obligations.
I wouldn't say they're an immoral person. I think the collection of all of your actions are what kind of makes you either moral or immoral. But that choice was if it was just out of pleasure and not like out of a need to take a break so that you can help more in the future. Because like think about like working, like you can't work forever. You collapse at some point or you burn out at some point, and then you're doing more of a disservice basically to the work you're doing if you don't rest. If it's not one of those situations, which he addresses, it's like the of becoming inefficient at helping. Then that action, that choice, I think it is immoral, but it's perfectly understandable, and it's a choice I would always make.
Hold on, wait, sorry. When you say that whether a person is a good person, or I guess the language was whether the person is moral or immoral depends on the net average, I guess you would say, of like different maybe not net average, but like the,
Like the collection.
I don't know
Of
what the
all
word is.
your
A
actions.
holistic, yeah, a holistic view of all your actions.
Mhm.
I don't know if you like when it comes to moral obligations, I don't think you would even believe this. Like if a person didn't murder anyone for 80 years, right? They met that moral obligation, but then they murdered someone right before they die. I mean, they haven't murdered anyone for 80 years. Does that somehow
I think
supersede the fact that they murdered someone?
they did like a very immoral thing and vile thing. They did an evil thing, but I don't know if I would say that that person is immoral or evil. Whereas someone who was like a serial killer who was doing it their whole life, I would say that person is immoral, and it wasn't so much an action that was immoral as opposed to their character. But I'd have to think about it.
Wait, what do you mean? Wait, a person who murders someone at the age of 80, you don't think is immoral? Why?
It's a very immoral action, but I don't know if I'd need to
If
know
murdering someone doesn't make you immoral, then what
I don't know
does?
why they murdered though. If they were like planning it out and
Why
they
why would murdering someone not make you immoral?
an accidental murder, manslaughter, I don't know.
No. Intentional, like unjust killing. Yeah.
Well then yeah, I'd probably if it was an unjust killing and stuff like that, despite all the good things they may have done before, I would say they're probably an immoral person. Yeah.
I don't. Okay, hold on. I don't view it that like. How can you? I don't think of meeting your obligations as a good thing. That's just like a neutral thing that you have to do. That's the way I view obligations. Like if I don't murder someone, I'm not like a good person because I
Oh
didn't
yeah,
murder them. I did the bare minimum, which is
yeah.
not murdering someone.
The bare minimum. So for Peter Singer, the bare minimum is giving,
Yes.
and by meeting the bare
Yeah.
minimum, you're
Well, that's his argument, right? Is that giving to charity is not supergatory; it's an obligation.
yeah,
That
it's
like the
pretty-
bare minimum we have to do is to give to charity.
yeah. He's saying it's not like not murdering. It's I don't know the definition of supergatory. Yeah, you're right. I lost my notes. Never mind.
No, I thought like he himself said the minimum with the weak one, the weak version of his argument is wrong. He said that like even if you're doing the weak one, you're still doing immoral things. You're not meeting your obligations.
Yes, true.
It's just something that's like less than
Yeah, yeah. That's what he says. And
so so like you would have to bite the bullet then if you hold Peter Singer's position and say that the person who's been giving to charity every single day of their life, every single one, and then one day they just decide to go to the movie theater because they want to reminisce on those times.
Mhm.
That basically yeah kind of does undo all the things they've done because they just didn't meet their obligation
no, because I think like
and that yeah
like there's like levels of moral obligation. Um, if you look at it like as a whole, helping out people your whole life and then going to the movies for a little bit, like the in my mind, be like the degree of morality is super low, whereas murdering someone, that degree is super high. That's like an extreme bad. That overrides.
oh but you're intuition pumping because um when you say that going to the movie theater isn't that bad, you're intuition pumping in that you're not doing anything comparatively bad. For Peter Singer, you're letting a child drown essentially,
Mhm.
and uh, helping the child drown is not something super good. It's just what you have to do. That's the obligation, so to speak. So giving to charity is not something that's like you're a good person for this or you're a great person for this.
Yeah.
That's just what you have to do. So
What,
I don't see how it
what
counterbalances.
what would Peter Singer say makes you a good person then, or makes an act good?
What would Peter Singer say makes an act good? He is a consequentialist, so maybe it's like you put yourself in situations to do more good than you otherwise would have been required. So, like someone who maybe dedicates their life to firefighting, that's probably not an obligation, but they're probably doing more good than they might be required. That's just one I can think of. That there's probably more, but essentially, like going out of your way to do good
I think
outside of your
maybe
typical
for him, I
obligations.
think for him, doing the bare minimum is doing good because he has a really high bar
Doing
for
the
what the
bare
bare
minimum
minimum
is
is.
good. He does have a really high bar. Even if I grant you that, even if I grant you that doing the bare minimum is good, the amount of good that doing the bare minimum is
Is great.
would never surpass letting a child drown, right?
No, I think
Like doing like failing to do the bare minimum would be so much worse than
since
just doing the bare minimum for a bunch of
the bar,
time.
since the bar is so high, bare minimum, like that word bare minimum, it has such like a pejorative connotation. But in like singer language or singer world, this bare minimum is a super high good, like a super virtuous thing. So
It's super high for us, no? Like it wouldn't be high for him. Imagine a Peter Singer perfect society,
mhm.
okay? where everybody's just constantly giving to charity,
Are we following
and the bare minimum is giving to charity. I imagine,
his strong thing or his moderate view?
yeah,
The moderate
no,
view?
the strong one, the ultimate Peter Singer society.
Yeah,
No, strong.
the strong.
Uh, even in that society, I imagine that people who give to charity are still going to be morally condemned if they're failing to meet other obligations. Does that
Okay.
make sense? Like if a person who's giving to charity constantly in a society where that's normalized,
Mhm.
where that is the bare minimum, let's say lies to their spouse or cheats on their spouse,
Mhm.
no one's like, oh, but think about all the charity he's given to. No, that doesn't matter. That's the bare minimum. Those are your obligations that you're meeting, and you went out of your way to fail to meet one of your obligations by cheating on a spouse.
Like these thought experiments, they're fine, but they're not very practical. Like it's not the way the world would ever be.
What do you mean?
It's not the way the world
Well,
would
okay. The reason I agree with you, but that's because I think Peter Singer's argument is wrong. I think the hard version is wrong. I don't think we I don't think we intuit that,
Mhm.
and I don't think his analogy gets you to the hard version. Like I don't think the drowning child example ever logically leads you to the strong version. It just gets you maybe to you have an obligation to give some charity. It doesn't even tell you like how much charity you have to give, just that there might be some obligation to some charity.
Yeah, I'm very curious to what he would define as good then. Does bare minimum or obligations or duties? It doesn't. They seem to be different words than something that's like good or above and beyond. Um, like I wonder what he would consider altruistic. If the bare minimum is what we would consider altruism, then I wonder what he would consider altruistic, even if or if that even exists in his world. I don't know. I don't know. I think it's midnight here, and I need to wake up early tomorrow to volunteer at the shelter. Super altruistic. But I need to get up early. Um, but yeah, I'll hopefully catch you guys next week, same time, or maybe a different time. Or something. And also, my phone got water on it and it's broken, so I can't go onto Instagram or anything like that. So I'll just like tell you guys on Discord or whatever what we're gonna read and talk about next time. But yeah, thanks very much for coming. And I'll see you guys next week. Hopefully, we'll see you around. It's fun talking.
So yeah, it was nice meeting you. Bye.